All right, well, welcome to all. On behalf of the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice and our partners, the COTA Alliance, the Zolberg Institute on Migration and Mobility, New Women, New Yorkers, Latinas en Poner, and Women for Afghan Women, I would like to welcome all of you near and far, and thank you for joining us in addressing a very important topic, localizing the Global Compact for Migration, Gendered Migration Experiences in New York City. I'm Dr. Lara Susango-Sorki, Assistant Professor for Political Science and Global Affairs, and the co-director of the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies program at the University of Portland. And I'm also, and this is why I'm here, the founder, executive director, and advocacy director at the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice, or CMGJ. And I have the honor of moderating today's event. Today's event on localizing the Global Compact for Migration focuses on gendered migration experiences right here in New York City. Gendered experiences in migration occur along a continuum, so in origin, transit, and destination countries. Based on a country's policies, gender dynamics might premise the reason for migration, but might also affect experiences along migratory routes and in destination countries. And along this continuum, women, girl, LGBTQI+, and gender diverse migrants might face heightened risks of marginalization, vulnerabilities, and violence. And the Global Compact for Migration, or GCM, addresses these experiences in its objectives and through a set of guiding principles, such as following a people-centered and whole-of-society approach. And so in connecting the Compact's objectives and guiding principles in the context of gender, today's event brings together community leaders to explore the implementation of the GCM in a city setting. As part of our discussion, we will identify challenges, efforts, and remaining gaps in localizing the GCM through a gender perspective. And before we get to the community leaders dialogue, and as part of my welcome to the event, I am humbled to introduce Dr. Achilles Kalergis from the Zolberg Institute on Migration and Mobility to deliver the keynote address. Achilles is an assistant professor at the New School and the director of the Cities and Migration Project at the Zolberg Institute on Migration and Mobility. And in this role, he coordinates the research platform on cities, migration, and membership, a collaboration of the New School and 15 research institutions from around the world. His research focuses on urbanization, migration, and mobility in rapidly growing cities. Specifically, it explores how locally generated data can provide new evidence on mobility patterns and contribute to improving living conditions in low-income urban settings through better provision of housing and services. Achilles, thank you so much for joining us and for delivering the keynote, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here. As you know, you heard from my CV, I'm not specialized in any way in gendered experiences, so I'm going to provide you with my entry points, which is New York City. I've been teaching at the New School a course called Immigrant New York, and as I was writing my notes for the keynote, I thought of the story of Annie Moore. Annie Moore arrived in New York City on January 1st, 1892, and was the first immigrant to be processed at Ellis Island. Together with her brothers, Annie rejoined her parents to start a new life in a new land and a new city. Her arrival marked the beginnings of an unprecedented human experiment that had already started decades ago, the creation of a city of immigrants. While cities in the US and worldwide have acted as gateways for migrants throughout history, New York City is perhaps unique in experiencing the continuous flow of migrants from various countries and continents. This constant replenishment of people bringing along their histories, culture, dreams, ideas, and struggles continues to reshape New York City, providing its dynamic restlessness. The journeys and experiences of migrants in the city are diverse and formed from various factors, including policies, social and cultural norms, class, race, and gender. Shifting gender dynamics from the origin to the destination affects the experiences of all migrants. However, women, girls, LGBTQ and gender diverse migrants continue to face disproportionate risks and are particularly vulnerable to shocks and discrimination. Poverty, economic and housing insecurity are unevenly distributed among immigrant women of color. The gender wage gap is still significant. One of the most damaging consequences of the pandemic has been the massive drop of women out of the labor force, with Black and Hispanic women experiencing the most critical losses. Violence against immigrant women remains a serious public health concern, and xenophobic attacks targeting women of color have been on the rise. At the same time, as we will also hear during the dialogue that will follow, immigrant women do not face only challenges. Along with the organizations that support them, they bring a renewed dynamism and open windows of opportunity through their activism and involvement with city politics at a time of change. Immigrant women actively organize, engage, and lead the social and political transformations occurring in the city post-pandemic. They have shown their essential and integral role in the city's recovery. For many of them, the city's new voting law providing the right to non-citizen vote in municipal elections will further strengthen their voice and increase their opportunities for representation and deliberation. The Global Compact embraces a gender-responsive approach to migration. It ensures that human rights of women, men, girls, and boys are respected at all stages of migration. Their specific needs are properly understood and addressed, and they are empowered as agents of change. It mainstreams a gender perspective and promotes gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, recognizing their independence, agency, and leadership to move away from addressing migrant women primarily through a lens of victimhood. Acknowledging the challenges and harnessing the opportunities associated with implementing the Global Compact's principles requires a closer look into the realities that New York immigrant women face. It necessitates a deeper understanding of how these principles are translated and embedded into local contexts. Gendered migrant experiences in New York City, the quintessential immigrant city, can offer insights and inspiration to cities worldwide and show how successive waves of immigrant women have continuously reshaped and continually reshaped New York. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our speakers, and I'm eager to hear about the work that the different organizations are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Achilles, for these important contributions to set the stage for our discussion today. You brought up various points that I hope we can explore further in the following community leaders dialogue, and of course also in the Q&A. So this said, please allow me to briefly introduce our speakers for the community leaders dialogue. Full bios can be found in the concept note, and more information about the respective organizations can also be found, of course, on their social media, and also as part of our social media showcase, which accompanies this event. So here are our speakers for today's community dialogue, and I'm so grateful for your time, for being here today. Ariel Kandel founded New Women New Yorkers in 2014 as the first nonprofit organization in New York City dedicated to empowering immigrant women from all backgrounds. As a daughter and granddaughter of immigrants and refugees, and as an immigrant herself, Ariel believes in the potential that every immigrant woman can contribute to the city, regardless of her country or origin or educational level. Ariel holds a master's degree in law with a specialization in humanitarian action and international law. Nitsa Segui is the founder of Latinas en Poder, a feminist collective to elevate the voices of Latina and Caribbean women transnationally. Most recently, she organized the first transnational women's summit for equality, inclusion, and social justice, which took place in 7 countries simultaneously to explore and dialogue about the roots of migration and other gender-based intersectionality. Nitsa is an international development specialist specialist focusing on gender, migration, economic democracy, and reproductive rights for over 20 years. And our third speaker for the community dialogue is Nahid Bahram, US Country Director at Women for Afghan Women. And Nahid was born in Kabul, Afghanistan. Her family migrated to Peshawar, Pakistan, where she taught ESL, so English as a second language, to Afghan women in the Afghan refugee camps in Peshawar. She moved to the United States in 2006 as an international student to study finance and economics. And realizing the needs of the Afghan community in New York, Nahid started working with Women for Afghan Women in 2007. So thanks to all of you for joining us today. The title of the event is Localizing the Global Compact for Migration, Gendered Migration Experiences in New York City. And our discussion takes place in the context of the International Migration Review Forum. So let's just begin this dialogue with unpacking this a bit more. Since all of you represent and serve different migrant communities, I would like to invite you to share some of the specific challenges that migrant communities in New York City face, with a focus on gendered migration experiences, and how these localized experiences relate to broader global dynamics and patterns at the intersection of migration and gender. There's no particular order, so whoever would like to get us started, please go ahead and take the floor.
I can go. Yeah. I think when I first came in 2007 and I started working here, when you come from a country like Afghanistan, or I was part of my life, I grew up in Pakistan as a refugee, you have totally a different idea of being in the West, and whether it's Europe or US, and having a very different life. And when I first came here and met the women and children that the Women for Afghan Women was serving, changed my mind totally about what I was thinking as a young woman in Pakistan. Obviously the immigrant community here in New York, especially the Afghan and some of the Muslim immigrant communities that we were serving, were really underserved. They did not have opportunities like other people. They did not, the social situation of each family was very different from what you would see it from far away. But also the education inequality, even in the United States for women, was really mind-blowing to me. When I came in 2006, just a few years before that, our schools were closed by Taliban in Peshawar even. The Afghan refugee girls' school were closed, even in Peshawar by Pakistan, by Taliban. And that was such a hard thing for us to take as a young girl. And education for women was something which was very important for me. And I was always wishing that lucky people who are in the Europe or in the US and they have this opportunity. When I first came, I found out a few families that they were immigrants, but their kids were born and raised here. Believe it or not, their daughter was 22 years old and she had never been to school in life. And it is the inequality in obviously education and social services for communities that we were serving, but also the domestic violence and gender-based violence, all of that. I think that was something that changed my mind, and that was something that kept me being in this organization for over 16 years. This is actually the only job I hold in the United States since I came. And it's also mind-blowing that the past 16 years that I'm only here and I see how people are working hard towards that, but we really see a very small change in what people are receiving.
Thank you, Nahid, for sharing these experiences and challenges that you've observed, especially over this particular time frame. Ariel, if you would like to continue, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Lara. Thank you, Nahid. Just to share a little bit about our organization, because we're fairly small, so I'm not sure people are familiar at all with us. We're a 7-year-old nonprofit based in New York, and we serve, like Lara mentioned, when introducing me, we really try to serve women from a wide range of backgrounds who come here in New York. We have a number of different programs, but with a very large focus on workforce development. So really the core of our mission is to support women in their professional journey here, in really securing what we talk about meaningful employment or quality jobs. Not just any job, but really jobs that our participants can provide for themselves and their family, and also can advance professionally, jobs in their field of interest. So that's what I will speak on more than other areas, because that's really where my field of expertise, I would say, lie at New Women Yorkers. What I can say is we have a number of women who are undocumented without work authorization. So they're really the challenge is we don't have a lot of quality jobs to refer them to, and that's been even more the case over the past 2 years with the way the pandemic has been affecting the jobs that they typically have access to. These women very often also or suffering from other barriers. We work with a lot of women who are single heads of households, so they don't really have any time to dedicate to their professional development. They essentially make ends meet, and they don't really have the time to upskill themselves, work on their English, which are full-time jobs in themselves. This has been even more acute again over the past 2 years because people really lost their employment, had to take care of their young children, of their close relatives with the pandemic impact. We serve a lot of women also who come with, who do have work authorization and who also come with higher education degrees. We have a lot more immigrant women who come with higher education now to the United States. But then the challenge for them is how can they still transfer, have their education, have their work experience valued and recognized here in the United States? How can they really, transfer this experience to get their foot into the door? And there, the challenge is also, in some cases, limited English proficiency, or really the perception that they do not have enough English proficiency to be successful. It's also the lack of network, because everyone knows that having a personal and professional network is really important in the New York job market. And networking is something which is sometimes not really existing in the form we have in the US in their home countries. So it's super nerve-wracking, honestly, for immigrants who come here and who don't feel confident already in their English skills, in their ability to really build connections in another language than their own. So at New Women Yorkers, this is what we put a lot of focus on providing programs to support women as they build their understanding of the US job search process, of US workplace culture, providing spaces where they can build in a way that feels safe their professional network, discover new industries of interest. So these are, yes, some of the areas that we really see a lot of challenges. I would say, just talking a little bit more about these past 2 years in the pandemic, what we've seen is a lot of repercussions on these women's mental health. We've had also a lot more women reaching out for situations of domestic violence. And whether these women have legal status or not, I think there is really common thread of not always knowing what's available for them out there in terms of health and social services, and really having to navigate these systems in addition to everything else.
Thank you so much, Ariel, for speaking particularly also to the challenges that pre-existed, but then may have been heightened during the pandemic, during these last 2 years. Nitza, if you would like to take the floor and speak to maybe additional challenges or similar challenges based on your work, please go ahead.
Hi, I am sorry that I got disconnected for a little while. But thank you so much for this opportunity, and I am really grateful to also share this opportunity with my other colleagues. So my name is Nitsa Segui. I want to speak of mainly the group that is part of our organization, which is a Garifuna group in the Bronx. And as many of our colleagues expressed, women migrating from the countries of origin, in this case, when talked about Honduras, has come with a lot of difficulties and inequalities in their backs. And most lately, a lot of women are coming, Garifuna women, and they have been here the Garifuna community has been in the Bronx for the longest time. But most recently, there's been a bunch of groups coming to the city, coming to the Bronx for different reasons. But mainly, there's a common ground. And it has to do with the corruption and criminal activities, and also climate change that has led a lot of women coming here with their kids, those that had the opportunity to arrive, of course. And part of what is going on is that many of these women were placed in shelters, but share common ground with what all the other colleague was telling, which is navigating the system that is not very particularly familiar for them, of course, but also to be able to feed their families with the little, a money that gets in. They do receive some funding, because through organizations, some money is driven, and there's food pantries that are also supporting many of these women, but still lack of jobs, employment, lack of opportunities. It is something, and also the language, it is something that is a problem. It's problematic. It's something that they are going through, plus not having their own place. And for women, particularly with children that have been traumatized by all of the violence that that was happening in the country, in their communities of origin, accessing mental health is another big issue. And it's a big issue not only for them, because they're also victims not only of violence, based on narco traffic, but also in their own homes. And having to deal with the children that are also traumatized by the outsides and the insides. It's something that they are aiming to, or looking forward to be able to receive, and they don't. And the other issues that also confront is access to health services and reproductive health services, particularly because most of them are undocumented, or still are on, trying to figure out the status in the United States. So these, which are part of larger problematics and inequalities that women and Garifuna women confront, is also related to racial issues. Not only coming here in this country, but but also coming from a country where they're also discriminated against. So I think these conversations are very important. I think not only in the context of the local level, but also in the context of the country, because we are going through as a country, we're having these conversations and we just came out, we are having these difficult conversations in the country about racial issues. And it is something that right now, I believe in the context of the Global Compact needs to be addressed, not only as women, but also as women who are Black or Indigenous, that have different identities that sometimes are not being taken into consideration or mightly considered in the discussions.
Thank you very much, Nitsa, for these important contributions and speaking to the challenges that specifically Garifuna women, immigrant women in the Bronx face, and really emphasizing these intersectional experiences and how they often seem and remain overlooked in spaces such as the Global Compact for Migration, for instance. So when we're thinking about this, of course, and as you mentioned, as all of you mentioned, that we're connecting the local dynamics to broader global dynamics, right? And then reflecting on your responses, and as mentioned earlier, gendered experiences in migration indeed occur along a continuum of origin, transit, and destination countries. These experiences develop, they evolve, and they change. However, they remain interconnected in various ways. And so taking a responsive angle next, I would be grateful if you could share what are some localized efforts that you have undertaken, so programs, initiatives in addressing the challenges that you've outlined, and how are they situated within the Global Compact for Migration, specifically in regards to its objectives that speak to the challenges, again, that you just mentioned, but also the guiding principles of the compact, such as following a gender responsive, a people-centered, and a whole of society approach. So please go ahead. We can certainly go in the same order if you like. If that gives some ease to the conversation. Nahid, if you would like to go ahead.
I think with what happened in Afghanistan for over 4 decades now, with the war there and having the Afghans being migrating decades after decades after decades with new regime, with new issues, with new problems, and especially since August 15 of last year when Kabul fell under the Taliban rule, I think the migration from that country to any other country has been really difficult. I'm sure we all know that the evacuation situation with the United States was such a huge, had such a lot of problems with it, that getting, we all know that about 80,000 Afghans have been evacuated and have been settled in United States, were brought to United States, not all of them are settled now. It has been 9 months since they arrived to United States. For some families, they are still living in a temporary housing, whether it's Airbnb or hotel rooms. And they only were able to get the refugee resettlement support for the first 3 months only in many states. So after 90 days, the refugee resettlement says, best of luck, your case is closed. I'm sorry we couldn't find you the house, but you're still staying in a hotel and hopefully you will be able to get a job and find something. And that happened to many families that we serve, both here in New York as well as in Virginia. With all that comes the challenges that mostly have been faced in a family or in a household have been faced by the woman. Majority of that, especially from getting through the evacuation situation in Afghanistan, the trauma that people have gone through, whether it was what happened to them at home, left everything behind. People left Afghanistan without having access to their bank account. They left all their saving, all their life back there, and were able to just get a backpack and leave the country for safety. And then coming here and staying in a military base or a refugee camp for months, where obviously the trauma that they have been through in those months, all of that frustration and everything would be taken on women. So there was obviously a lot of domestic violence issues, mental health issues when women were in the bases. Women for Afghan Women as the only direct service provider in the East Coast took on providing cultural competency and domestic violence trainings on the base. And we provided this training not only to female engagement team, who are the staff who usually work with women in the bases, but also with the Afghans who are in the base. So we did a training, we did a series of 4 trainings for the Afghan refugees, but we also did 2 trainings for the staff to make sure that they are aware of what domestic violence is. For many people do not even identify what gender-based violence or domestic violence is. What are the resources and how can they prevent it? And also, similarly, it would have been useless if I would do that only to women and leave the man who, in majority of the cases that we work were the abusers, leave them without that education. So what we did, I worked with the local imams and make the imams who were the obviously religious leader to the base with me, who would sit with the man and do those trainings for the man, and also explain to them about the consequences of their action in this country. And then after that, when people are out in the out of the base, now there is the challenges of housing crisis in many cities, including Virginia, the 3 largest states that Afghans really want to be resettled. And that's a huge issue. As I mentioned earlier, people have been here for 9 months and they do not even have a long-term housing. A rented apartment people haven't gotten yet. Or finding jobs. Ariola just mentioned so beautifully earlier about how difficult it is for some people to not, even though you're a skilled woman, but if you cannot speak the language, best of luck finding anything here. And with all of that, also the issue of unaccompanied minors. We brought so many minors without family members here and then gave them to agencies which had no Afghan or Farsi or Pashto speaker in the body of their organization. They had no volunteer or a staff who could speak the language with these kids. The kids were out of Afghanistan in August and they were given to the foster care agencies in early September. Majority of these kids did not have, I actually know somebody who do not have an interpreter now. So it has been from September to now, it has been almost 8 months and he still do not have an interpreter. So a child who cannot communicate with the staff members who are working with them on social services or mental health, how can he get the help? And obviously that creates a lot of behavior issues in these children. Unfortunately, this is for unaccompanied minors, but also the youth who came with families and who are resettling in the states where they are not really very welcoming to immigrants and people of color or Muslims at all. We just had a case of, we're not sure if it was suicide or what it was, but they are saying it was a case of suicide of a 14-year-old boy who came through evacuation last year from Afghanistan in Missouri last week. When we talked to his father, the reason that he has given was he has been bullied in school every single day because of his appearance, because of the way he was speaking. He could not speak English because he was Muslim and he was fasting for the month of Ramadan, and people would make fun of him not being able to eat or drink. And the family found his body being hung in a lamppost on the street after 2 years. He was dead 2 hours before he was found. So knowing all that happening to the families that are coming, I mean, when we talk about California or New York, they're states which we will still see people are a little bit familiar with people of other colors. But when we think of states that where refugees are not welcome, immigrants are not welcome at all. And unfortunately, because of the large number of immigrants being welcome at one time to United States, they have been sent to states that there is no other immigrant, there is no other Afghan families around them. And that these are the challenges that people are facing now.
Thank you, Nahid, for bringing this up, particularly also kind of placing or situating the experiences in New York or other larger cities in comparison to others. Ariel, could you speak a little bit to some of the programs and initiatives that you offer in efforts to address the challenges you outlined earlier?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, like I mentioned, we're still a fairly young organization. The first few years, really the early years, we focused much of our workforce development work on really focusing on the individual barriers faced by immigrant women in their search for employment. And so I would say our programming has a 3-dimensional approach in that regard. One, we really focus on providing a space for women to build their confidence and their level of proficiency in English, especially in a professional setting. The second dimension is really about upskilling their job readiness skills. Consolidating their job readiness skills and upskilling themselves as well, especially maybe I get a little bit too much into the specifics here, but especially when talking about soft skills, because soft skill can be so different in the context of your home country and in the US context. So it's all about how can you transfer your soft skills to that specific context of your home, of your host country. And then I would say the third dimension has been really about providing a space where women can develop a better understanding and comfort with the US culture and the US work culture in particular, and understanding also where they come within that work culture and what also how, you know, their voice, how their culture can play a very important role as well. Because the US culture, the US work culture obviously has been also really impacted by the contributions of immigrants throughout, you know, the years and decades. So this is really like this three-dimensional approach that we use in our workforce development programming. And so, you know, just to give examples, we have job readiness workshop series that are really the first pillar of our programming. We have then group practice and networking sessions with partner companies, and then a lot of individual support tailored to the needs and challenges of the women we serve. We do all this within a context of community building, and this is really essential. Having a community of support, both on a personal and professional level, can make such a difference in the trajectory of these women. So we build that community within New Women New Yorkers through, you know, we create opportunities for women to meet with each other, to exchange resources and advice, to build their personal and professional network. And that then really helps them in their professional journey to find employment, and then to also protect themselves from vulnerabilities in the workplace once they have that employment. I would say now, looking at the past 2 or 3 years, we've been trying to put much more focus also on educating employers, educating our partner companies, and trying to shift mindsets from within, trying to really bring employers to have hiring practices and learning and development practices that are not discriminative, and that are, it's beyond that, you know, companies talk about diversity and inclusion, but how do you make that more than a buzzword? How do you make that really tangible? How do you welcome and create an environment which is inclusive and which really advances immigrant workers, and especially immigrant women workers? So that's something that we're working a lot on. And, you know, to bring just a small note of optimism maybe in that conversation, I do want to say, you know, we see this year with some hope, because a lot of employers in New York and other places are struggling. I mean, that's what they tell us, to bring employees. And at the same time, they seem to be more open to really make their diversity and inclusion policies tangible. They understand the need. So there is a moment of opportunity here that we're really trying to seize as an organization, to bring very strong candidates that have never been considered to employers, to companies, to industries that are growing and that have really high job needs and a lot of potential.
Thank you very much, Ariel, for bringing this up and for making this connection, and really elaborating on this kind of three-part approach, as you said, and how this all goes together, but also stressing this last part in terms of, you know, what might be some opportunities to leverage on. Nitza, I would like to turn to you now, if you could share any of the efforts or initiatives that have been in place, either continuing in terms of your partner and member organization in the Bronx, or otherwise. Go ahead. You're muted.
I'm sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, so I would like to address in two tiers. The first tier is the Afro-Descent Women Association, which is AMA, the organization that we work with in the Bronx. AMA is a new organization. They started up a year ago, and they have a lot in their hands. And the reason they started this organization was because they identified that there was little support to the groups of women that they were coming, but they also were working with other women that, are in the country for a while, and they didn't, with the TPS issue. So they were trying to support them to, through this path, through the TPS path, but also pathway, but also for this group, new group of women that are in shelters, they're helping them to provide them with food and immediate services, and to plug them with the different, needs they have and the services that may be available for them, which are very little at this point, but also support them with the children to go to school or to go to mental health clinics, or the churches and the food pantries, and all of the above. The second layer that AMA wants to intervene is working with youngsters, with young women. So they are developing a curriculum to develop their capacity for them to develop their leadership, and at the same time to also support them to understand how the system works, and how they should be driven their time in school, so they can go to universities that will support them financially eventually, to so they can study and they have a professional careers, given the fact that many immigrants, Garifunas, are working in the domestic, doing domestic work, and a lot of their experience of these domestic workers, are terrible. But yet, it's important for the sustainability of their homes. So they would what they want, and their dream is to help and support these young women to move away and to go to the, to look into professional careers eventually. And the other tier uh, of ALMA, it's advocacy, and advocacy work at the local level, working with other organizations that can support the work that they do, but also to support the women that they're working with, because they don't do services directly, but also advocacy at the city level, or the state level. I mean, thinking of Washington right now, but the state level, they do a lot of advocacy. They have developed great relationships, and interpreting what Garifuna women are going through, and what they need what support systems they need from the government at these different levels. And so, as they are part also of Latinas in Poder, which is, and the other part of this process is that what we do is to support AMA's capacity to provide the services and the support systems that the women need in the Bronx, but also training them to understand how the systems work. Because the more you learn on how the system work, the less they will find that less difficulties in interpreting it to these women, how they access to all of these services, given the fact that many of them can speak English. So I think this is very important, but also trying to block them with other services, like women that are victims of of domestic violence. The Garifuna community have women in the Garifuna community hardly talk about this. It is something that it's very hidden into the family, the violence that occurs. So having women talking about this is it's a very important issue, and we are supporting them to have these talks with women also so they can learn also to take care of themselves and to learn to other security systems so they can survive, because surviving it's it is important at this point for them.
Thank you very much, Nitsa, for bringing up these various initiatives and also efforts that are very targeted to the challenges that the communities face. Looking at the time, and we're not so strict to have to end right at 5, but I wanted to see if there are at this point any, and would like to actually move to opening up the floor for Q&A to make sure that we have, if there are any questions that our audience would like to pose to any of the panelists, of the speakers, or also if the speakers have questions or comments for each other. So if you do, please go ahead and post them in the chat. And if there aren't any at the moment, I am also happy to ask another question, because I have one lined up, but I want to make sure that we have some open floor time as well, if there are any questions. Okay, I will proceed at the end. Oh, is there a question? Nope. Okay. So that there, thank you for again sharing these efforts that have been made in addressing the noted challenges of migrant communities in New York City and how they're situated within the Global Compact for Migration. So looking forward, and in thinking about these localized challenges and corresponding gender responsive efforts, as key stakeholders from around the world are here right now in New York City to convene the review of the Global Compact for Migration, it would be great if you could very briefly speak to some of the remaining gaps in localizing the Global Compact for Migration, particularly in a country that is hesitant to ascribe to international commitments as it pertains to migration. And then with that, maybe as we're also heading into the conclusion of the event, to if you would like to issue any calls to action as part of your response here. And Achilles, please feel free also to contribute to this part of this section. So I'm moving here into the Q&A/concluding remarks at the same time. So remaining gaps, calls to action, the floor is open. Please go ahead. Nahid, would you like to get us started again?
Yeah, I can. I think there is so much in remaining gaps, especially in this country. Our social services really is in a bad situation for refugees and immigrants. So definitely improvement in that is needed. The refugee resettlement system of only 90 days. We all know we cannot resettle a family in 90 days in a new city, in a new state, in a new country with a lot of differences. It's particularly have been really hard after pandemic for people. And in New York, because of the rent situation, the landlord will not give you a space unless you do not have a 3-month pay stub, tax returns and information and all of the pay stubs. And for immigrants who just arrive here, have none of them. Call for action. I mean, for a particular group that we work right now, as I want everybody to please, 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 please call your elected officials, ask them to approve the law for the Afghan Adjustment Act. There is over 38,000 people here who have been evacuated by the US, who have no way to go back to Afghanistan because of the situation, but they only have a temporary visa for 2 years, and not all of them can afford to do an asylum case. And the process, the fee, the immigration, the attorney fees, and all of that is not something that the families can do. So please do that if you can. And I think the other part, which is important, I think for many communities, sexual assault, domestic violence, all of this is still taboo topics and people do not talk. Please start speaking about it. It's happening in every community. It's happening with every single person in one way, one shape or others. But unless we do not talk about it and we do not educate our communities, nobody's going to talk about it. I think this is what I had to say, but I also want to answer the question that Grace posted on the chat. We do not talk with both. We talk, or I mean, legally, we are not supposed to work with both. We only work with the survivor, or but we know that when a domestic when a domestic violence situation happens in a household, Afghan men or Muslim men usually go to the imam in the mosque to ask for support. So what we do, we have provided domestic violence training to the 4 Afghan imams in New York that we work with. There's 4 Afghan mosques in New York that we have been working with closely. So we have provided trainings for the imams so that they can respond in the right way. So they know what are the resources, they know where should be they sending the man, but also how can they educate them about it, and how can they prevent the situation from happening. And we only work with the survivors.
Thank you. Oh, Nahid, you're muted.
I'm sorry. So I just wanted to mention again that we only work with the survivor, but we want to make sure that the imams are well educated to be able to provide services for men when they go to them.
Thank you very much for identifying these remaining gaps and your call for action, as well as for answering the question on the floor. I'll pass it to Ariel next for some concluding remarks, maybe on some remaining challenges, but also calls for action.
Thank you, Lara. I'll try to keep it super short because all of the things that Nahid just shared are so relevant. I would say remaining gaps. There are a number of sectors in the US that are in high growth, and yet it remains so difficult for immigrant workers to get their credentials recognized and their experience valid. I'm thinking New York right now about health and education, for example. So definitely more work done on that front, especially when there are needs and people there to actually respond to these needs. Second remaining gap, I think we need to talk about undocumented immigrants, and not only people who have work authorization, legal status, and also create opportunities for them. I know that's challenging and not well accepted, but that's definitely an area that I would highlight. In terms of call to action, thinking about really this COVID period, the fact that a lot of countries are still shaping their COVID recovery policy, really call stakeholders to include immigrant communities in their COVID recovery policies. That's so important. Immigrant women in particular, have been so severely affected by the pandemic, and they're such an important part of the recovery as well. But there is sometimes a temptation to really just focus on non-immigrants youth. And I think this is something that we should not do. We should think about our immigrants in New York and beyond as we're shaping our COVID economy recovery policy. But thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Ariel, for bringing this up, and particularly also the underlying structural challenges that of course, unfortunately, still remain. Nitza, I would like to pass it to you next for any last brief thoughts on remaining challenges, but also calls for action as we are here and this event is held as part of the International Migration Review Forum. Please go ahead.
I'm thinking of, the connections between the local issues that women are facing in communities that are related to legalization and also criminalization because they're undocumented in the country, or some that are seeking asylum, but it's really
Nitza, I think at least the connection seems to be a bit unstable. I'm not sure if you can still hear us. Achilles, I will pass it to you in the meantime. Maybe Nitza will come back if that's okay. Go ahead. Remaining challenges, calls to action.
That's good. So, well, I think, as we heard, there's several remaining challenges, but if I would try to summarize a little bit some of the issues mentioned, I think something that is very important is that it's quite clear, and I think all of us here are probably immigrants in the United States in this panel anyway. So we have some sort of first-hand experience how difficult it is to navigate new cultures, new places, including networking, etc. So, of course, it's way more difficult in some of the challenging situations that we heard. So, one thing that is key in terms of the gaps that needs to be addressed, I think, is to create the sort of structures and I imagine the city together with organizations working in the communities to create the sort of structures that are necessary in order to navigate these spaces better, right? Search for housing is particularly difficult. A lot of the issues that we heard are issues that are very well known, right? Not being able to rent an apartment without having any credit score or prior landlord recommendation, etc. So facilitating this by creating something that is a little bit more fluid in terms of the rules that apply for specific populations, I think this is very important. I think New York City is moving towards this. They did open up affordable housing to undocumented households, which for a long time that wasn't the case. That doesn't mean that housing is not a challenge anymore, but I do think that New York can work as a sort of as it has been, as I said in my introduction, is a sort of experiment as to how you create spaces for assimilation, integration, whatever these terms mean, because they can be very loaded. So and finally, it's very important to connect as an academic. I think it's very important to connect with the organizations and the work that we heard so far. At Zolberg and at the New School, we're actively trying to place students with different organizations, try and help out. Many of these organizations are very much stretched in terms of human capacity and people who are able to work on certain things. So I'm offering, it's an open offer to all of the organizations that we're speaking here. If you need assistance, the New School in Zolberg has motivated students interested in these questions and very much concerned with social justice issues, and we'll be happy to work together and try and help out. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Achilles, for bringing up and kind of also summarizing some of the main challenges that were mentioned throughout the event. And as always, there is more to be discussed, and I truly hope that today's event serves as a connecting point. So this was really nicely kind of coordinated here without knowing, as a connecting space between the local and the global. And indeed, at the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice, we pride ourselves in being locally based and globally engaged. And so with this, I would just like to, again, thank everyone for participating in today's event. We will follow up with a guidance note based on today's discussion that will be published shortly. And I would like to say thank you and take care. And I'll hereby close the session. Thank you all so much.